All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really mind-bending concept from a recent talk by Sadhguru. We're looking at this radical idea that human perception is actually vastly superior to our standard go-to methods of logic, studying, and rote memorization. It's a completely different paradigm for how we interact with information and the world around us.
Now think about this for a second, because it challenges a deeply ingrained habit that pretty much all of us share. When you hear something super important, what's your immediate reaction? You probably grab a pen, right? We all desperately try to hear, record, and write down every single valuable word. But the source material suggests that in our frantic, almost obsessive effort to capture the data, we are completely missing out on true perception. Section 1. The limits of words. Let's break down exactly why relying purely on spoken or written language is kind of holding us back.
See, we've basically trained our minds to act like literal tape recorders. We hear the words, we record the data, we frantically try to memorize it, and we write it all down. But human perception, it goes way, way beyond just processing and regurgitating technical jargon. If we're only engaging at the level of words, we are barely even scratching the surface of our actual cognitive capabilities.
Moving to Section 2, absorbing rather than studying. To really get this, there's this great story about a dinner Sadhguru had recently with a top-tier environmental scientist.
So this scientist, probably expecting to hear about a massive list of dense academic journals, casually asks Sadhguru what books he reads. And his answer? I read Asterix and Dennis the Menace. He actually said that. Just noting that between his crazy travel schedule, even getting the chance to read a daily newspaper is a pretty big deal for him.
Well, naturally, the scientist is just totally baffled. He asks, then where do you get all the information? I mean, you can imagine, he just couldn't fathom how someone could sit there and speak so deeply about such complex topics without spending countless hours buried in scientific literature.
And here is the hilarious, but honestly profound truth of the situation. While the scientist spends literal years studying all that dense technical jargon, Sadhguru is just relying on perception. He explained to the scientist that he literally picks whatever technical words he needs directly off the people sitting right in front of him. The info is already right there in the scientist's brain, so through pure perception, he just absorbs it in the moment without needing to crack open a single textbook.
Section 3. The illusion of knowledge. Let's look at how this builds into the core philosophical difference between just hoarding words and, actually knowing something.
If you're sitting there thinking that having a massive vocabulary and knowing all the right terms means you know about life, well, here is the ultimate secret. You really only need to buy exactly one book, an Oxford Dictionary. Why? Because practically everything that has ever been said or ever will be said is already in there. You just have to arrange the words differently. But obviously, hoarding dictionary definitions doesn't get you anywhere in terms of real wisdom.
So there's a really crucial difference we have to make here between empty stories and experiential knowing. No matter how incredible an empty story is, if it's just words, jargon, and imagination, it's not going to change your life. But experiential knowing, that's entirely different. If something is going to profoundly change you, there absolutely must be an experiential dimension to it. And that dimension only happens through direct perception. Without that actual perception, the most profound information in the world is just completely empty.
Section 4. The Vivekananda phenomenon. Now, to take this concept of perception to its absolute mind-blowing extreme, we have the legendary story of Swami Vivekananda. Let's set the scene real quick. It's 1893, and Vivekananda is making huge international waves as the first yogi to travel to the United States. Later on, he's traveling back through Europe, and he happens to be staying as a guest with a German philosopher. After dinner one evening, they head into the philosopher's study to chat.
Sitting right there on the table is this massive, highly complex book. We're talking over 700 pages, entirely in the German language. The philosopher had been raving about it, but admitted he was basically stuck. He'd been trying to read it for weeks without making any real progress because it was just so incredibly dense and complicated.
So Vivekananda gets curious. He asks if he can borrow the book for just 1 hour to see what's in it. And the philosopher literally laughs out loud. I mean, he'd been struggling for weeks himself, and more importantly, Vivekananda didn't even speak a word of German. So he asks him, super skeptically, "What will you do with it in an hour?"
What happens next is just astonishing. Vivekananda takes the massive book, doesn't even crack the cover, just places it between his two hands and sits there with his eyes closed.
Exactly 1 hour later, he hands it back and calmly states that there's nothing significant inside. Now, the philosopher thought this was just peak arrogance, judging an unread book in an unknown language. But then came the proof. Vivekananda told him to pick any page. The guy asks about page 633, and Vivekananda verbatim, word for absolute word, repeats exactly what was printed there. He could do it for any page requested, proving this seemingly impossible level of perception.
Section 5. Perceiving life beyond logic. And this wild historical event brings us right to the ultimate takeaway of this whole explainer.
When this utterly stunned German philosopher asked how on earth that was possible without even opening the cover, Vivekananda shared something super personal. His given birth name was actually Narendra, but his guru gave him the name Vivekananda specifically because of his extraordinary viveka. And viveka translates to a profound ability to perceive. He wasn't reading those pages, he was perceiving the contents entirely.
Which brings us to a really fundamental realization about how we process the world. You simply cannot process all of life through your logical mind alone. Why? Because logic is inherently a filter. It actively filters out massive amounts of your life, reducing reality to just this tiny trickle of processed data it can actually understand. Pure perception, on the other hand, lets you bypass those rigid filters. It allows you to absorb and experience life fully, completely, without losing the very essence of reality that logic just strips away.
So, I want to leave you with a really provocative thought to ponder today. If your logical mind is constantly filtering out the vastness of the world around you, are you actually experiencing life? Or are you just sitting there reading the dictionary, mistaking the words for reality itself? Think about that as you step back out into the world today and maybe consider how you want to absorb the incredible life happening all around you.